in a troubled world. And we talked about the need to assess things. You know, when tragedy happens, there has to be a period of assessment because we as humans want to know what happened. We don't like this big question mark. We don't like the unknowns. And it's really important to try not to replicate disasters again and again and again, right? So there's this need to assess. And we kind of talked about the process that the TSA or NTSB goes through anytime that there's an accident. They go back and they reverse engineer these accidents, and they really genuinely figure out what happened. And so we do that to the best of our ability. But today we're going to talk about the need to grieve. That's such an important process when tragedy strikes. And Dave, you can go to the next slide. You guys surely have heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler. They've done tremendous work on identifying the 5 stages of grief. And those 5 stages are denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. And these are not linear things. They don't happen in this linear fashion. They can happen in any order. They can happen at any time. And we're going to watch a short video of David Kessler, which I think is excellent, where he kind of talks about this process and what it looks like.
I know so many are suffering and struggling. David Kessler is a world-renowned grief expert who knows the agony of loss firsthand. His journey began at age 13 when he witnessed a mass shooting at the same time that his mother was dying. Welcome to the table.
Hi.
I've read your books and was so excited. There's a lot we want to ask you. I know that you can be very helpful to us.
Absolutely.
The first mass shooting. Why don't you take us through what you went through?
My mother was dying in a VA hospital, just like your dad. I was 13. I couldn't go up and see her. And across the street at a hotel, a fire broke out and then shooting began. It went on for 13 hours. So one of the first mass shootings in the U.S. The shooting, and then for her to die, I was just numb. And like the only thing I was told is be strong. Grief is natural. Organically, we know what to do. But our modern society is the one that tells us, be strong, get over it, move on, you shouldn't feel it, find closure, get over them. What kind of closure?
Yeah.
One of the things people don't realize is when our loved ones die, I always say, don't give death any more power than it already has. Don't give death the power to end a relationship or the power to end your love. Death can take someone physically, but your love of your mom and your mom and your mom and your grandmother never dies. We can't heal what we don't feel. So when we suppress them, that's what goes wrong. We need to get them out. We judge our feelings. We have feelings on feelings. I'm angry, but I shouldn't be angry.
Go through the process.
Go through the process.
A lot of people don't go through the process.
When we run from grief, we are in the pain longer. And to me, the goal of grief work is to remember those who have died with more love than pain. When we allow that to happen, it shifts your body. My younger son had been drug exposed. I naively thought, love will conquer all. Love helps everything. It doesn't stop the wounds of childhood. And so when he turned 16, he called me and he said, I just tried drugs and I'm in trouble. And I was like, what? Pot, beer, what? And he said, meth. Oh. And I said, your first drug is meth? And it became a series of years of in and out of rehabs. And he worked so hard to be sober and to have a life. And he called up some friends. They went out and used. And they lived, he died.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Heartbreaking then, heartbreaking now. I often say, people have said, you talk about gratitude. Can you find gratitude for your son dying? And I said, here's how I can find gratitude. There's only one worse thing I can think of than my son dying. Me never getting to know him this lifetime.
Exactly.
Even if it was 11 years, you got to know your mom. None of this is guaranteed.
Loss can be not only physically, it
Right.
could be mentally, emotional.
A job, a wedding, a divorce,
A pet,
moving, a
losing
pet, all kinds of changes that we don't want.
Can you take us a little bit through those 5 stages of grief?
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross first identified the 5 stages of dying: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. That came out in her groundbreaking book on death and dying. Over the years, people applied them to grief, sometimes not well. And that's when I was privileged to work with her and adapt them in our book on grief and grieving. And literally on page 1, we say, they're not a map for grief. There's no one way to do grief. They're not linear. Your grief is as unique as your fingerprint. The stages follow us. We don't follow them.
Okay. And you can go back to a stage
In
and
an
you were
hour.
already there.
Anger,
think you came out of
acceptance,
it?
denial. Absolutely. In an hour, you can do them all and circle around.
No, I never heard bargaining.
Bargaining is the what ifs, regrets, and if onlys. It's the guilt.
Right.
Most of us have guilt and what ifs and if onlys, don't we?
Even if we keep them
We
from
always
ourselves.
want more.
And even if there's nothing that you could have done, even if there isn't a what if, you still wonder what if.
And I have people who their parents have died at 100 years old. They still want more. They still wish they could have done it differently.
course.
We all have those feelings. It's so normal.
Losing my mom, and I think we can all agree on this, it was devastating. It was the biggest loss I've ever experienced in my life. And I lost a baby at 45, which was my last opportunity to have a baby.
And you were so excited. We
all were.
So
Yes.
excited.
We
Yeah.
all were. It was tough.
So much so that I still have that ultrasound picture on my phone because I just can't get rid of it. And I immediately thought, what did I do wrong? It's funny because I was just starting nursing school. I became a nurse midlife. About 3 months into it, I went into maternity and found out that spontaneous abortions happen between 8 and 10 weeks. And normally it's because there's something wrong with the baby.
I was so surprised when I was writing this last book. I said, I want to talk about miscarriage. And people said, but you haven't had a miscarriage. And I said, I cannot do a grief book without putting miscarriage in it
very
because
real.
it doesn't get talked about. And when it doesn't get talked about, people internalize it and think they did something wrong. The first thing, and you know this, you did nothing wrong. Miscarriages, just like death, happen in our life. I want to ask you, the ultrasound,
Why am I holding on to it?
why would you want to let go of it? It's
I
the
don't
only
want to
picture
let
you
go of
have
it.
of your baby. Would we ever say to a parent, give up the one picture you have? No.
Oh my gosh. There it is.
There it is.
I'm like, anyone who says you've got to give that up, haven't you given up enough? You do not have to give that up.
Amen.
You do not.
Absolutely.
You keep that in your heart. And your job, I bet, and I've heard this from so many people, I bet it's true, you wonder how old that baby would be, what they'd be like.
My husband and I talk about that baby. Oh, how old would they be now? And I had names picked out. I had,
Your work is to raise that baby in your heart. I learned this with my own son. We think our job is to make the grief smaller. The grief doesn't get smaller. We have to grow around the grief. When my younger son died, and I was the father who had to bury a child, but I was also a grief expert. And I would go, yeah, I'm in anger. Yeah, I'm in bargaining. When I was in acceptance and struggling with that, I go, I can't do it. I can't stop at acceptance. I wanted more. And that's when I identified that 6th stage of grief. I wanted us to find meaning. Meaning is the 6th stage of grief. We're finding meaning at this table. You wearing something in honor of your mother. is meaning. You being an NICU nurse is meaning. You talking about how grief affects you is giving power to people to admit it out there who are watching this. That's your meaning. Miscarriage, divorce, saying we're not bad because these things happen. They happen. That's
stop
life.
there.
That's part of the deal. We can't take away the...
I think it's pretty powerful stuff because he had a lot of, just really aha moments. We're told to move on. We're told, get over it, find closure, be strong, don't shed tears, be strong for your kids, right? Like we hear that a lot. And I think it really, like Kessler said, David Kessler, he said, that keeps us in grief longer. And we think that our job is to minimize grief, make grief smaller. It's not. Grief will never get smaller. Our job is to grow around it. He talked about finding meaning. I found acceptance. I got to the point where I accepted the loss of my son, but I wasn't okay. And so there's this need to find meaning, and that's when he identified the sixth stage of grief, which is to find meaning. So the question I think that's really relevant for us finding hope in troubled time is, what does God say about grief? How does God respond to grief? Because I've heard so many cliches in the line of work that I do with trauma and abuse. Never have I heard more abuse heaped on top of people who are suffering so badly by Christians. Christians are the worst offenders at telling people, hurry up and move on, just put more faith in God, things will get better, there's a bright side, at least they're in heaven, at least, this happened to you, but at least this didn't happen to you, as if that makes people feel better. And it totally bypasses the whole grief process. God gave us tears, God gave us emotions, God gave us the ability to be angry. Anger is such an important part of this step. So here's a scripture, Psalm 56:8. This is the New Living Translation. You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book. What does that say about God's position towards us when we're grieving? Get on Prozac, right? Is that what God's telling us? Here, this will numb you for a while. This will help you. This will help you squelch those bad feelings that you're feeling, so that you can function and you can go back to work, right? Like that's what we want. You can go back to school. You can go back to work. What does God say about grief? Do it. Go through that process. Let the tears roll down, and I will take my finger and I will wipe them off your cheek, and I'll collect them because they're precious. We don't hear that as Christians. We don't hear that tears are precious. We hear that tears are weak, that it's a sign of, it's a sign of weakness. It's a sign of even bitterness, that, it's about moving on. And you heard the one lady, and I don't know their name. They're all related. Yeah, thank you. Gloria Stefan. Yeah. So, yeah. So they do that show, The Red Table Talk. Her daughter's sister, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's called the Red Table Talk is their show. Yeah. But she's talking about losing her baby, and you can tell, without her explaining herself, you can tell that she feels guilty for holding this picture. Well, why is she feeling guilty about the picture? And I love how David Kessler approached that. He's like, I'm going to ask you something. This picture. And he just kind of left it hanging there. And she's like, kind of puts her head down. Why do I still have it? No. Why would you get rid of it? That's the only picture you have of your baby. Why would you get rid of it? See, society tells us the opposite. You know, my mom does work in grief. She wrote the book Silent Grief back in the late 90s because it was about miscarriage. And exactly what David Kessler said, people don't talk about miscarriage. It's like this, it's this hush-hush, like women they keep it to themselves because it's so taboo to talk about. So Mom wrote that book, and one of the things that she talks about is parents who buy clothes for their unborn babies, right? They hold on to those clothes sometimes forever. And they feel so guilty about that. And they're like, why am I holding on to these clothes? Why can't I just get rid of them? Why can't I bring myself to bring them to Goodwill or Salvation Army? Because that's the only physical piece of your baby that you have left. That's why. And that's okay, right? Tears are precious. It's important. It's an important part of grieving when we lose something. And this is not just death, right? Go ahead to the next slide. Genesis 45, 1 through 3. I'm going to read this. Starting in verse 1. Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room. This is the scene when he reveals himself to his brothers. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. And then he broke down and wept. This is the leader, the commander of all of Egypt. What a weak little baby, right? What a wuss. Couldn't even get himself together. Right? Is that what God says about him? Joseph, in a moment of weakness. Right? No, not at all. Listen to the text. Then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. This was like ugly cry, right? And then verse 3, "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. "Please come closer," he said to them. So they came closer, and he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives." See, there are a couple things going on here. One is that grief is necessary. Weeping was necessary, and it was natural. It was a natural response to all the years and years and years, hard years, of heartache and sorrow and pain and anger and jealousy and all this stuff that was going on. But the other part of it too is Joseph properly assessed the situation, right? We talked before about the need to assess. Joseph had the wisdom to step back and to say, okay, I don't know what God is doing with my life. I hate it, right? It's terrible. It's awful. He was put in prison. First he was thrown in the cistern. Then he's sold into slavery. Then he comes into Egypt, and then he works his way up, and things are actually looking good. And then he's thrown into prison, right? Falsely accused, thrown into prison. There's all this stuff going on that's just heartache after heartache after heartache. And then come his brothers, and for Joseph, that was the moment when things clicked. And I think that's part of why there's this wall of emotions that hit him. He properly assessed. He didn't go out, right? Assessment's so important because he didn't go out and was like, my brothers did this and I'm going to get back at them, or whatever. Or my lot in life is just to be a slave and I'll never amount to anything. It is what it is, right? We have that saying, it is what it is. But Joseph had the wisdom to step back and assess and to constantly, routinely assess. Joseph reconstructed what went on, right? We talked about reconstruction. He went and he was trying to figure it out, put the pieces together, and make sense of this puzzle that's called life. And then when his family comes, I can't imagine the aha moments that he experienced. And then he was like, it makes sense. This was part of God's plan all along, and God used me. God used me for that plan. And to have that weight both falling on your shoulders and being lifted off of your shoulders at the same time, it's this overwhelming wall of emotion, and Joseph just let it all out. It was so important. And God honors that. God wants us to grieve and to be angry and to go through all of these emotions. The next and final story that we're going to talk about today is Jesus Christ, God in the flesh himself. DP's favorite verse is John 11:35, right, DP? Shortest verse in the Bible. What's it say? Jesus wept. Easiest verse to memorize. It's the shortest. This is the context for that, right? Lazarus has been dead. Jesus predicted he would die. He tells his disciples, and they're all kind of scratching their head. And Jesus, like almost seemingly casually, just kind of delays. He's not in any hurry to get to Lazarus, to heal him before he died. Well, then Lazarus died, and word gets back, and Jesus is now moving with his disciples to go meet family members, grieving family members. Here's the text. John 11:28-37. Then she returned to Mary. She called Mary aside from the mourners and told her, "The teacher is here and wants to see you." So Mary immediately went to him. Jesus had stayed outside the village at the place where Martha met him. And when the people who were at the house consoling Mary saw her leave so hastily, they assumed she was going to Lazarus' grave to weep. Isn't that interesting? Like in our culture, I don't think that's our first thought. We're like, man, she must be going out to really deal with this and just be strong. Their assumption is this woman's having a complete breakdown. And she's going to be with her dead brother and to weep. And so they followed her there. When Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." Can you imagine? Like that, it's kind of a jab in the heart. If only you had been here, he wouldn't have died. I've witnessed you do miracle after miracle after miracle. We believed in you. We followed you. We're disciples of you. You tell us to jump. We ask how high. We've done everything to follow you. You had the power to save him, and you didn't. Verse 33, this is where it gets really interesting. By the way, this is the New Living Translation. I prefer this translation because it's actually very accurate to the original language. And the other translations really, I think, botch this translation, what's going on here. Verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him. And he was deeply troubled. "Where have you put him?" he asked them. They told him, "Lord, come and see." Then Jesus wept. The people who were standing nearby said, "See how much he loved him?" But some said, "This man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying?" It's this anger. It's this bargaining. right? They're going through these stages of grief. Couldn't he have just healed him? Other people, look at how deep his love is. He's angry. I want to look at these words for anger because how does the ESV, does anybody have the ESV open? That's what I usually read from. Or other, doesn't matter what translation. Verse 3, how is that translated in different translations? Deeply moved. Doesn't that sound warm and charming? He was deeply moved. It's not what this word means. He was P-I-double-S-E-D. Right? He was angry. He was mad. There was this anger that welled up inside of him. He was deeply moved. Oh, he was moved all right. He was moved to fury. He was angry. Go ahead to the next slide. It's going to be really hard to see it because it's so small. This was mostly just for my own notes to put in here. But that word for deeply moved, which the New Living Translation says he was deeply angry or something like that. That word in the Greek language that John uses, embermaomai, which means, here's the definition of it, to be moved to anger, to admonish sternly. And then under usage of the word, I snort. You ever hear anybody so angry that they actually snort?
I only do that when I'm laughing.
There is the laughing snort, but there's also, it's that labored breathing. You ever see anybody pace? When they're so mad that they're shaking. You ever hear it, right? You ever see anybody do that? You ever do that? That's what this word means. Listen to this. To snort with the notion of coercion springing out of displeasure, anger, indignation, antagonism, to express indignant displeasure with someone, I charge sternly. Another definition of it is this. Engaged in, to snort. Properly, snort like an angry horse, literally. Snort, roar with rage. Strong indignation, deep feeling that is moved to sternly admonish. He is loaded for bear. And I don't think it's at the people because they look at him and they're like, see how much he loved Lazarus. His anger is not directed at the mourners. He sees the mourners and he gets angry. The next slide, which is the next word, he was deeply troubled. So the first part, he had this deep anger well up within him. That's the word we just talked about. And John says he was deeply troubled. Well, what does that mean, he was deeply troubled? Well, here's the word that's used for that. The word is terasso. This is such small print, I have to blow it up on my phone. Here's a definition. To stir up, to trouble. Remember in John also, when, I don't know why I just remembered this. I remember this from my Greek class from like 20 years ago. You'll probably remember this too, right? We translate John. That's the first book that we translate is the Gospel of John. Remember when the lame man is sitting on the edge of the water? He's waiting for somebody to push him in. He was waiting for the waters to be troubled, trasso, to be stirred. So it means I disturb, agitate, stir up, trouble. Properly, to put into motion, to agitate back and forth, to shake to and fro. Figuratively, it means to set into motion what needs to remain still or at ease. In other words, something that's supposed to be still, something that's normally still and calm, and the rose gently swaying in the wind. This is the bully who walks up and kicks that flower, knocks it over. Something that's supposed to be calm and still and peaceful, they come and they intentionally agitate it. This is Jesus' state of mind. This is what's in his heart. This is God in the flesh when he sees his friend Lazarus dead and the people mourning his death. Is anger an appropriate response? I mean, I hope so. But what do we hear? Right? Do you ever see anybody at a funeral? Or not even a funeral, just at the news of death, or just some kind of bad news. You ever see anybody kick a door down? I saw somebody at our school, and I'll never forget this. There was a really bad drunk driving accident that claimed the lives of 3 people in Shanksville when I was in high school. And I watched a family member of one of the people who had passed in that car crash. We were actually at school whenever people got the news that they had died. No. This accident happened in Shanksville. And I remember seeing a family member. I'll never forget this scene. He walked up and he took his fist and he punched a locker as hard as he could punch it, and that door it just caved in. And people didn't know how to respond to that. And even as a young kid, in my mind, I was like, wow. That's an appropriate response to grief and sorrow. It's the unfairness of it all.
That's how my cousin Michelle is with her mother. She's seems angry since she passed away.
Yeah.
All I do is cry about it.
See, and we try to pull people out of that. We try to pull people and be like, no, like, especially as Christians, no, like, the Bible says don't be angry. And I say, but it also gives expression to anger at times, right?
What was Jesus angry at? I mean, he knew what was going to happen.
He did. My take is, because the way John is laying this out and explaining it, Jesus is looking at the people weeping. And that's when he got agitated. He was agitated. And I think for him it was this acknowledgement of the brokenness that happens in life. That life, God doesn't like death. I think in our minds we're like, well, God created death, so God must be cool with it. Well, I think that God weeps with us. And I think that's the whole point of what John's doing with this story. Is that one, God weeps with us, he's angry with us, he loathes death with us, he gets troubled, he's pacing back. Jesus is physically pacing back and forth, snorting like a madman, like all of this anger is welling up inside of him. I think just at the whole experience of death and seeing all these people weeping and wailing. And the other part of that, John tells us, is that Jesus did this so that people would believe that he has the power to raise people even from death. And he wasn't using this as like I'm going to really use Lazarus as a pawn so that people can believe. I don't think that's what's going on at all. I think Jesus did intentionally allow him to die, but I think it pained him so badly to do that. I think that Jesus was already starting to have labored breathing because he knew death was coming. I don't think that Jesus ever looked at dead people and was like, they're young, they'll adjust, right? He walks into these homes with people who are weeping over top of their dead children. And what's he do? He raises them from the dead. Like death is not something that God's like, well, as Christians, the Bible says that you need to put your faith in God and cast your burdens on Jesus. This is Jesus himself who's angry. He's angry at the whole situation. Jesus didn't use this as a time to say, come, lay all your burdens on me, for my yoke is light and I will give you rest. Right? Jesus didn't say that in this moment. But that's the kind of things that we do. When people die or when there's this big tragedy, we automatically rush to these calming, let me look up all the verses on peace. Right? What if we said, let me look up all the verses on anger and sorrow. Let me acknowledge your pain.
Jimmy, I've always been one, and who am I? If I look at it as a Christian, or if I look at it as one that is non-Christian, who am I to tell someone how to grieve or how to lament?
That's right.
It's none of my
That's right.
business, other than I can feel sorry for that individual.
That's exactly right.
All for their love.
Yep, the way that we express grief can be, and like David Kessler said, it can be, you can go through all 6 of these in a matter of an hour. Like everybody's different. And he says, the way that we respond to grief is as unique as your fingerprint. Every single person responds that uniquely different. I want to get this last slide here, Dave, this last scripture before we're out of time. It goes on, John repeats this, right? The very next verse. Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb. Well, it's okay to be angry for a little time, but, as Christians, right, we better move on. We better strap on a smile. Be strong for all the other people who are mourning Jesus. No, Jesus, as he shows up at the tomb, is still angry. And it's that first word, this snorting anger. It's this labored breathing. He is physically agitated as he shows up at the tomb. I've never read this story this way. How many people have read this story like that? One, because you read it in the original language. You cheater. I've always read translations where it's like this moving, touching scene where Jesus like was warmed over and, he's like gently approaching people. I never realized, and I don't know why, it never jumped off the page at me, but he's agitated. Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb. A cave with a stone rolled across its entrance. Listen to the language, how blunt he is. Roll the stone aside. That's how I read it now. I used to read it, roll the stone aside, okay. No, he's angry. He's angry at death. He's angry at sorrow. He's angry that all these people are weeping. He's angry that Lazarus was taken too soon from them. And he says, roll that stone aside. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. We don't want more sorrow on top of sorrow. We don't want to smell. We already saw him die. We don't want to smell his death. It's too much, Jesus. And Jesus responded, didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believed? So they rolled the stone aside. Then Jesus looked up to heaven and said, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me. But I said it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here so that they will believe you sent me. Then Jesus shouted, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and his feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. What's interesting, he's eliciting language that brings you back to the Exodus, right? Pharaoh, you let my people go. Free them from this bondage. That's what Jesus, free these people from the bondage of sorrow and suffering, and let Lazarus go. I love it. I love this scene. I love the anger. I love the emotions. I love the rawness of it all. And I wish that we would teach people to do this. I think we'd find hope so much faster. It just becomes so clouded when when we suppress this inside of people and we're like, no, 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 Christians don't get angry. You want to bet?
Yeah, there's times I feel like I can do buildings.
Right? Yeah. You know, if we let people do that, I think we'd move a lot faster towards acceptance and finding meaning in tragedy. All right, we're out of time. I'm going to stop there. We'll see you guys in a little bit. Thank you.